So thank you all for being here, however it is you are here. I'm just so grateful for your commitment to the church, to students here, to visioning and being creative with us. Thank you. So imagine for a moment, you're a young woman who's recently been widowed. You've dropped your kids off at a church youth event, and then you go over to the Christmas fair, which is happening that day. You wander for a bit, but find that something about being in that crowd of people is making you feel even more alone than you had before. So you start to leave, and there in the doorway you see one of the younger church matriarchs, someone you've kind of gotten to know a bit recently. She's one of those women who just everyone admires for her warmth and vibrance, and there she is standing in a very silly Christmas hat as she is talking to somebody you don't know. And you don't want to interrupt, but when she sees you, she interrupts this conversation to say to this person, "Oh, hang on a second. I would like you to meet my friend." And she gestures towards you and says your name. Or perhaps it's easier for you to picture yourself as a man at the peak of your career, and you've recently relocated to a new area. Your wife has joined the church choir and made fast friends there, but you're still trying to find your place in this new community. You usually sit on your own in church, but you make an effort by going to the coffee hour. Before long, a man comes and strikes up a conversation with you. You enjoy talking to him. The next week after church, he comes and finds you again, and you have another lovely conversation. As time goes on, you start to notice that every Sunday he's there, this man makes his way to find you. Or perhaps you're someone who remembers all too well what that transition to new motherhood was like. Add to that a complication of just having moved to a new city and not yet speaking the language there. So you've just wrapped up making your tour of the maternity ward as you're preparing for things, and you happen to hear some older women nearby speaking English. You approach them apologetically and ask if they have any suggestions for a newcomer looking to meet other Anglophones in the area. They immediately invite you to come to their church. You start going, and before long they have you in the women's group too. Once your baby arrives, she's coming to those meetings with you, and those ladies make sure she is as welcome there as anyone. You hardly hold her when you're there. All the women are just delighted to take their turn passing her around so you can participate. These are just mere slivers of a few of the stories I had the absolute privilege of hearing as I was investigating this question of how friendships take shape through church life. Over the course of the month of January, I conducted 16 interviews with 30 participants. Mostly I interviewed folks in small groups and pairs, and some I interviewed one-on-one, as they all reflected upon the friendships they had formed through church. Now, if you want a sense of what these interviews were like, picture the end credit sequence from When Harry Met Sally. Do you know what I'm talking about? That montage of couples all telling the story how they first met. Only this time, picture those pairs as church friends. Y'all, these interviews were an absolute delight. But aside from friendship just being a fun thing in our lives, why does friendship matter? As we learned from Michelle, isolation and loneliness pose immense risks to one's physical, mental, and spiritual health. And we are finding that it is more important than ever to support people who are seeking connection. Practices of friendship also have a long tradition within Christianity. Some of you may be familiar with, Some of you may be familiar with the Celtic Christian tradition of anamcara, or of having a soul friend. God has the power to draw faithful people into friendship with one another, and friends have the power to draw one another closer to the holy. This is an aspect of faithful friendship that has been called the triadic nature of Christian love. As our relationships with our anamcara are drawn closer, so are we drawn closer to God. So, how do friendships form in and through church life? I wanted to dig beneath just the experience of church friendship, and try to formulate at least a loose theory of church friendship development that might help us, as church folks, make our communities more fertile ground for growing church friendships. So I chose grounded theory as my methodology. So without further ado, here are the major themes that came up most frequently as things that contributed to the growth of friendship in church life. There are 6 themes which can broadly be broken into 2 categories. The 4 you see here in these circles, the pivot points, represent fairly concrete activities or points of contact that help participants turn their relationship from one of acquaintance to one of friendship. These are things like the stuff that happens on Sunday mornings, or the extracurricular church activities, the non-church activities or points of contact folks might have, and there are, of course, in any growing relationship, key moments of invitation or initiation. Whatever points of engagement 2 people have with one another, they help turn that connection into friendship. These other 2 more liminal in-between categories are spirituality and authenticity are a little harder to nail down in their role in friendship formation, but they came up constantly in interviews as elements that really animated the friendship, bringing it to life and moving through the friends' participation in all their other church activity. It will come as no surprise that for many of these sets of friends, there we go, that for many of these sets of church friends, spirituality played a huge role in the initiation and growth of their friendship. In a culture in which someone having an active and intentional spiritual life is no longer assumed, folks talked about how much they appreciated having church friends with whom they could talk about spiritual matters and pray together. I heard a lovely story about some parents starting a Bible study for adults, but they made it a bring your kids along situation because it was important to them that their children grow up seeing their parents praying and learning about God together. Another pair articulated the role of spirituality in their friendship like so. I think my spiritual life is richer for having a church friend, someone who is willing to go to the deeper places with me and allow me to be a whole person. So you can see how related spirituality and authenticity are here. Our spirituality is a huge part of who we are, but it's a part of ourselves we're not always comfortable bringing to everyone. Having church friends allows us to bring that part of ourselves and know it will be accepted and affirmed, and therefore we can be more fully ourselves and then connect on that deeper level. And authenticity itself was also something that folks flagged as a feature that not only enriched and grew their friendships, but as something that initially attracted them to someone who would later become a friend. I want to summarize a story one woman told about meeting a man who would eventually become one of her closest church friends. One Sunday during worship, this man shared a spiritual reflection on his battle with cancer, and this testimony made an impression on that woman. Later, on another Sunday, this man again addressed the church, but this time in the context of his role as an executive on their church board. During this address, he invited anyone who had any questions or concerns about the church to bring them to him. And because of his prior sharing, that offer struck this woman as really authentic. She'd been dealing with a certain frustration with the church and had wanted to bring it to someone, but hadn't known how yet. What she said to him during our interview was, your ability to be vulnerable in that context made quite an impression on me. And I think that made it easier for me to go see you. The man's earlier vulnerable authenticity set the stage for her to feel like he was someone she could go to with her concerns. So she did. And that's how this pair of now longtime friends met for the first time. They would later cross paths again in a spiritual practice group, and that's really where the friendship would develop. But I love this story of a first interaction for a few reasons. Prior to that initial connection, each of these individuals was dealing with something hard. It's not easy to get up in front of your church and talk about having cancer. And it's not easy to bring a frustration directly to somebody either. We might think that you always have to be flexing your best life to attract friends, or be like aggressively people-pleasing to make friends. But here we see the opposite at work. It was these moments of vulnerability and authenticity that set the stage for what would become a long and rewarding friendship. Now, the first of the more concrete themes around a point of contact centers around the Sunday morning happenings. Sunday mornings, it seems, is often the anchor for many church friendships, even if it's not really where the major growth of the friendship happens. Folks definitely had a sense that worship is primarily about connecting with God and nurturing your spirit, but it's still a place and time in which you can go and expect to see your acquaintances and friends. As one fellow noted, the place you sit in church, it becomes your personal neighborhood. A lot of people talked about sitting near one another, going to coffee hour, walking or driving to church together, and then talking about the service together on their way home. The opportunity to at least meet people and provide that initial point of contact also paved the way for folks to feel empowered to initiate further relationship. As one participant, a mom of school-aged kids, noted, I felt like I was seeing in passing all these people and I thought, they seem really nice and I wish I could spend more time getting to know them, but there just seems to be no time in a normal Sunday morning. This woman had noticed that some of the older women in this church were part of these small groups that would meet together regularly. She thought something like that might be nice, so she took the initiative and started a group. After some experimenting with a few different configurations, she ended up assembling what would become an incredibly tight-knit group of women that has been meeting for nearly a decade now. And this brings us more formally to our theme of church activities. Now, I'll admit, I came into this project with this question kind of in the back of my mind. I really wanted to know which genre of church activity would be the best one for forming friendships. Would it be peeling potatoes for a church supper, or joining a Bible study that would make you wrestle with deep questions of faith, or participating in a committee's intense discernment about the future of the church? Do you think that I came away with one capital B best activity for making awesome friends? I did not. But I did hear all of the above affirmed as wonderful ways of finding and growing connection. Women told stories of laughing and crying together in the church kitchen. And when I expressed surprise to all the other women in the interview, they laughed and nodded and said, yep, Jessie, right there in the kitchen. I heard stories of folks who grew close through a Bible study and would go on to take big multi-family vacations to Mexico together. I heard from people who met on a planning committee and would bond over a mutual admiration for one another's approach to problem solving. I even heard from a few different people who were finding that they missed the Zoom coffee hour that we'd started during lockdown. One participant had this to say: I'm so grateful for Zoom coffee hour because of Diana, and I'm using all pseudonyms here in case you can't tell. Because of Diana Barry. Being there and getting to know her, it was such a good chance to know her on a different level. Now that we're back, you go to church and you see people and say hi, but it's not the same, and she paused here to get the right word. It's not the same intimacy we had before. It's kind of too bad, really. This was a surprising take to me, but one that makes a lot more sense now in light of Caitlin's research. Regardless, I heard all kinds of church activities lifted up as ways that now longtime friends had met and connected. One of the other surprising findings in my interviews was how often a non-church point of contact, in addition to having church in common, led to friendship. I spoke with a number of people who referred to church as the anchor or the main thread of their friendship, but for whom some other activity like volunteering for a soup kitchen or local theater, or having kids in the same activities, or even just living in the same neighborhood, played a significant role in their recognition of friendship potential, and then in the acceleration of the growth of that friendship. One participant recalled her first experience of being recognized by another mom from church while she was out. Stacy approached me once at a Time for Twos thing at the library, and she knew that I went to church. I think that was the first time I was pegged as a church lady. And those two would go on to become part of the same small group and would watch their children grow up together. Another member of that same group said this: "I know when I see these ladies out in public and I've been going through something, I know they see past that public face and they've got me. There's a value in that because it's a deeper thing, and I don't have to say it. They just know because I said it when we were meeting. It's a really special interaction to have in that way, even if it's just a glance." In a time in which church attendance isn't the norm, church provides a really special point of contact for people who are seeing each other out and about in other points of their lives. Now, finally, the theme that surfaced most universally throughout the study was that of invitation. In every single interview, someone spoke of being invited, being sought out, or specifically being included in something. One participant shared how hard it was for her moving to a new city and not knowing anything, and talked about the first time she was invited to just come help out with an event at church. "I think if Josie hadn't reached out to me and said, 'Why don't you come and do this?' I wouldn't have gone on my own. I guess I needed to have had someone that invited me. And then that became the catalyst for me meeting other people. And once I knew a few more, then I felt like my old self again. And then I reached out and invited people back to my house. But without that initial invitation from someone, I probably wouldn't have gone." Along this theme too is initiative. The groups especially that I interviewed all pointed to a sort of master coordinator who took on that labor of keeping the group going, even when scheduling became a monumental task. One participant referred to one of the other ladies there, who was their kind of point person, Anne, as a premier friend. She knows how to do friendship. She puts commitment to it. She takes initiative. Friendship does take work. And though all the groups mentioned having that kind of a point person, that isn't to say that the coordinating labor couldn't be shared, but more to point out that the labor itself is necessary to building a relationship. So, based upon this research, the best advice I might offer to church leaders, and if you're now going on hour 3 of listening to seminarians geek out about stuff, you're a church leader. My best advice for folks looking to grow connection in their communities would be to, first, cultivate the art of spiritual conversation within your community. Help equip folks with an accessible spiritual vocabulary and new levels of comfort praying together. This will help folks identify and seek out kindred kinds of seekers. Second, encourage and model authenticity and appropriate vulnerability to help others feel comfortable sharing their full selves too. I think that retreats in particular are activities that amplify both these features of spirituality and vulnerability. If you're spending an extended amount of time with someone, you're more likely to be more authentic. And guided spiritual practices are lovely starting points for a conversation during unstructured time. I did hear from several participants who would love to see retreats make a bit of a renaissance in church life for just these reasons. Third, if you're involved in preparing Sunday services, you could think about how it may serve as a subject of conversations between parishioners, and as such, an opportunity for them to bond and share in some spiritual conversation. Fourth, support the offering of a variety of church activities and encourage members of the church to take leadership in these activities. The vast majority of folks I interviewed bonded through lay-led activity. This is yet one more reason we need to be equipping the saints in our midst. And also encourage folks to get involved in secular community work that's close to their hearts. If they cross paths with another church person there, there's a very high likelihood that they'll have lots in common. And lastly, never forget the power of invitation, of feeling confident to personally seek out someone you'd like to know better, and then invite them to do something, anything, from peeling carrots to helping the search committee find the next minister. Take any opportunity to help someone feel chosen and called more deeply into community with you. Remember when Jesus said to his disciples, "No longer do I call you servants, but now I've called you friends"? Even Jesus made sure to call his friends friends. We are called to be friends to one another, to name, initiate, and call relationships what they are and what they mean to us. If I leave you with one thing from these 20 minutes, it would be to, like the friend of the young widow I spoke of at the very beginning, and like Jesus himself, make sure to call your friends friends. Thank you.